This is the Nephew observability meetings on, well, I guess I put it on Pacific time, February 19th, 2024. And yeah, I didn't really publish an agenda, but then I guess this kind of goes without saying that we are. I mean, well, first of all, does anyone have anything they want to talk about before we get started?
A quick point from my side, one of the chairs for SIG security. I saw this meeting on the calendar page, and I was quite interested because security and observability goes hand in hand. So I was quite interested in understanding what's happening here. So hence I joined.
Great.
Looking forward.
Welcome. Yeah, well, we've had a number of ad hoc meetings before then. And this is because we were obviously we're in our 3 development cycle now, so we decided to make this a little more recurring meeting, and then hopefully some folks will be picking up things, so we can get things moving.
And this is the only Nephew meeting which is very friendly to the time zone I am in.
Yeah, non-friendly to US, non-friendly to US, but kind of friendly to hopefully everyone else.
Yeah,
it turns out we don't. I mean, as far as I know, so far we haven't with the discussion Slack channel, we haven't had like a lot of US folks overly interested. I think they're interested, but then I guess contributors or folks that are interested to contribute, they are not really in US. So okay. So let's get started. Okay. So as I posted on the Slack channel, I file a bunch of issues, and I file an epic, and then group a bunch of issues behind that. And there were some. There were several discussions already, so I hopefully those are not overly strange to folks. What is this? So for our 3, I added this like right before the meeting, so this is very early. I would say that we probably have to extend the user stories a little bit, but so far, so we had 1 major user potentially on service assurance. They rely a lot on the observability framework, and I mean, to be honest, whether or not SA actually lands in L3, we're not sure. But then at the very least, we have some input on what they actually what you do. At the same time, we had very simple and preliminary request by saying that there's the fact that R1, R2, if something gone wrong, there's no visibility into what actually went wrong. So I think that was a direct ask from Bala, and I think that's fair because it is true. And then so that's also something we have to actually sort of worry about. Beyond this, I think we kind of promised that the applications or users can specify what they want to monitor, but that's not like a wildcard because obviously our visibility on Nephew, the system, is basically an NF deployment at this point. So we in terms of what kind of things we want to actually look at, it's based sort of on what we can actually deploy. So we're deploying the granularity of a NF deployment instance. So we should be able to group all the visibility data off of an NF deployment instance, whatever that actually becomes, and be able to use that as like the lowest granularity that we can go. or the finest granularity that we can go. We wouldn't be able to go like deeper into like, oh, let's ping into an interface. I mean, that information, if it's available, it will be grouped under an NF deployments and then exposed. But then, you know, the system aren't really aware of an interface name per se. There's a request of a data lake. That was way earlier, like several months ago, when we're talking about what should we, how do we scrap the data, and then how do we present the data, and one of the ask was, we do want to get all the data together in unstructured format, so that's the data lake, and then so normal ways to build, well, I mean, there's not normal ways, but then the more conventional way of building a data lake, people put like Spark SQLs on top of that or things like this. So we still kind of put it into a dummy table and then be able to query this. But obviously, if we collect data, we got to have a way to expose that data. So there has to be some way for users to be able to get into it, get a information of what actually is going on. So there, obviously, we are leveraging as much as possible things like Prometheus and Jaeger and FluentDs to get logs and traces and metrics as a collector. And each of those have their own querying languages on top, which is still SQL-like. And the idea would be, do we expose each of these collectors and allow applications to individually able to use the conventional language by those collectors to be able to get the data, or we are managing it such that there will be a more standard way, more uniform way to do this. There's no answer at this point, so it's pretty unspecified. And then, but then we have to have a way to expose it, obviously, and then subscribe to changes. So there are certain things that we should be able to say, oh, if a change happens, we should alert the subscriber. There was an ask, I think, directly from SA saying that if a certain metrics fall under certain thresholds, let them know. I don't know how advanced we can do this, but then there's something to keep in mind. And then obviously there's just time A to time B, get me all the information that you have. It's pretty standard. And then we will additionally want an operators to be able to subscribe or be able to get a visibility data, because the NF operator itself may actually use that to determine whether or not they're meeting a particular status, or whether or not they have to take actions to reconcile. So with that, the first thing to do is getting the data, scrapping the data from the NF. And for folks who have experience with 3.5GC, there's really not much to grab. They don't really expose much on 3.5GC. The only thing we know of anyway is they have a REST API to get subscriber related informations. So there's no like so this is basically because they have some sort of UI, and then that the web UI, whatever API the web UI consumes, is pretty much the only API that we know of that can get information about 3.5GC. OAI isn't a lot better, I heard. I don't know that much about OAI, so I don't want to say that for sure. But then I did hear from Subhash, the SA lead, that there is a work items from Saga's side that he's gonna build a little more data, more observability data off of OAI. So that basically conversely means that it's actually not really available yet at this point. and that's probably going to be true for most of the open source thing. And so for us, we had a lot of the bulk of our discussions actually for a while was particularly Martin, who's not here today. He's actually been checking out, investigating what could be done in the system to get more information off of network functions in general. So they're in the very beginning, a long time ago, I was proposing creating a generic sidecar. So you'll be getting informations of well, CPU memory utilization is actually just part of Kubernetes. You should get that. And then can you get information about how many sessions are being established on that particular container, and you can get the packet counts. If you're a sidecar, you can do ifconfig because it's on the same namespace, so you'll see the secondary interfaces also. Then you'll be able to get the count of the packet counts or byte counts, and then snap it into different data at different times, which gets us into some sort of basic throughput calculations. So those are the ideas that I think I even presented during the summit last year. Martin actually came back and said that there are a number of little things, number of tools that could be used. That he and I haven't assigned it to him yet, but then he's been investigating that part, and then he hasn't volunteered himself yet anyway. And then that would be the first thing. So we'll give at least. I'm not saying that. So Nephew should create a baseline, a Linux-based things at least, that would allow us to get information like number of sessions of the port that we are actually interested in, and the packet count of a particular interface on a pod or on a container in a pod. Then that becomes more like a baseline things that we can generate by ourselves. Whether or not network functions would use them, or other functions would use them, is not of importance in this case. We just want to have a very basic set where we are saying, if you use this, and then we may be using PPF and some other things too moving forward. It's probably not going to be a sidecar at the end. If you use this, at the very least, we have we know that at the very least, as Nephew observability, we'll get these data off of any generic network functions, generic networking data off of this, if you're running on Linux, which is usually the case. And so that's one of the items that Oh, go ahead, Peter.
Oh, hi, hello.
Hello.
I believe here we have to remember that you can have different type of data. First of all, you can expect that the vendors will use, for example, open telemetry, let's say, API, SDK to instrument the network functions, and it will be the intrusive monitoring or instrumentation, and you probably would like to gather the data. And the second approach you mentioned, for example, using eBPF as a non-intrusive solution. And do you see to make use of both sources, or you don't care about metrics which will be provided out of the box? I mean, it's really hard. I mean, because the vendor, depending on the vendor, you can have different metrics provided, but somehow you need to take into account that they will be there. 350C expose nothing, like you said,
yes.
But it will be not the case at the end.
Yeah, so we are, the motivations for us doing this obviously is because 350C gives us nothing, and then that's our default, if you will, default implementations. So we do need to grab something. The good side of that is if it's well designed, then whether or not other network function vendors will use it, probably maybe not, because obviously network function vendors, commercial products, have much better exposing of data. But then for those who doesn't have it, at least we'll have a baseline of what we have. And then as a reference implementations, we'll show people that we can do something with the data that we can get out of this, even though it's very generic. And then the other part is the exposing part. We obviously, as for some of you folks knows, we already talked about using OTel interfaces as a way to instrument. If we are going to, well, one of them is just sending metrics out to Prometheus or some other collectors, so that's okay. The other one would be if you use open tracing type APIs, if you want to generate trace data. So those are some of the pieces that we are thinking of doing moving forward. Yeah, but then I mean, at this point, this is more like because we're facing a network functions that doesn't really have any basic things to expose. We would like to create a data scrapping, data gathering engine that we'll be using anyway for the purpose of showing the framework works. So that's the main purpose at this point.
Yeah, sure. One more comment because I can see someone has a hand up, but regarding the open telemetry, I'm in the middle of kind of the research, and I can see that, for example, the auto instrumentation, it's really dependent on the language your application is written. So as I know, out of the box for the Go-based microservices, auto instrumentation is not here. I mean, I saw that there is a tool which is using eBPF to auto instrument such network functions, but as I remember last time we discussed to omit the eBPF at this point. Question is if it will be reasonable to omit that.
Is it reasonable to omit what? Which one? So you're talking about the language limitations because it's more powerful if you use Golang at this point. Is that what?
Yeah, I'm asking about the eBPF. If we are going to have some kind of mechanism to use eBPF at the first proof of concept, or
so if that's so if this is what whoever volunteered to take this on, they have the freedom to investigate technologies and contribute that technologies. So if we're using BPF, then the expectations here requirement would be using BPF to get the set of data, and then we can refine this a little further than just those three, obviously. And then in terms of sending it out, exposing it, and then in terms of the R3 scope, whether or not we'll do more than just metrics, I'm not sure. But then if it's, let's say at the very least, able to be collected by an OTel collector, would basically be the basic requirements. So if you use a BPF, obviously it's not a application side because that requires root privileged for you to download BPF program. So we would basically expose it as either host tools to be installed by the infra provider, or it is a privileged daemon set that is also owned by infra providers, but they have to launch it off of a cluster. We can, either one is fine, I think. Yeah, so. Okay. Rahul, go ahead.
Hey, so my question is a little bit at a higher level. Like,
Oh, okay.
I saw two tickets here. One is in the context of workload observability, and the other in this context, I see uptime or Kubernetes resource or deployment observability, right? Like these are the two things that I see currently on the table. Then there are a bunch of other things, right? Like what gets used under the hood, whether it's eBPF, whether it's sidecar, whether something, the application itself has a way of emitting the telemetry. All of these things would would happen later, right? Like, first of all, is the scope actually has there been a discussion about what should be part of the R3 scope, or is this the discussion where that discussion is happening right now? Is application workload observability that we are targeting? Is uptime Kubernetes service or deployment observability that we are looking towards? Is security observability that is primarily important, or is performance observability and monitoring that is primarily of concern? And will it be different for management clusters, and will it be different for, or the scope includes edge and regional clusters, and the kind of requirements we really, which clusters we want to so has there been any difference in the context? Because you mentioned, Stefan, that that there has these discussions have been started like since last year. So I was wondering whether there has been
Oh, so yeah. So the so initially, the reason why I'm actually even kicking this off in the first place, initially there was a requirement of basically there's only one requirement in the beginning, gathering all the statuses off of all the deployments. So that's how it started, because Google actually seeded that code back in around R1 timeframe, and to be honest, the community hated that code for good reasons. I mean, there's some parts that just simply doesn't work because there's some GCP related framework that we leverage on the SIG code. We think that we'll do something different on our VM based systems and container lab based systems, but then the feedback, particularly from Vim, because he kind of owns the container lab piece, is that it's much more difficult to do on the network plumbing side. So I was like, oh, okay, so we'll do something different, and then we don't know what's different is, but then that becomes a way to extend by saying that, oh, how do we get all the statuses off of different clusters, all the different NF operators, basically in this case, all the NF deployment instances sitting on the edge clusters. So that's our first level of visibility, if it is. So now, once you do that, if you solve the problem of how do you get something back to the management clusters, then the next question anyone would ask would be, oh, can you stream metrics off of that? Because usually on an edge system, you don't do a full bloom Prometheus deployment. Someone would like to centrally get all the metrics, and so that's the second questions. So it becomes more like a workload related things. That's mostly it becomes more like a workload related, application related visibility data gathering. Is what was being asked. Obviously, observability by itself, as you said, it's a lot of the scope is pretty high. It's pretty large.
Right.
What it's supposed to gather. I think last meeting, Kieran, who's actually has his hands up, was asking, "Oh, are we doing visibilities into the Netfield systems? If something fail, in the software, when we'll be able to gather this." So it goes into different layers. At this point, based on discussions, based on the fact that one use case heavily relying on observability, so maybe that is actually a priority, which is the SA, the service assurance folks were asking us to at least get throughput data, because the number one use case is basically just getting bandwidth adjustments and things like that. And we were, so the only question is, can we get information about throughput changes out of the threshold? So that was the ask for us. For me, I try to get status, and then if the status have some changes, NF deployment status is very light. So I hope it's actually much more powerful than that, but it's not. So, but then if there's any changes, we would be able to say, hey, let's go into everything that pertains to this NF deployment. Can we get all those data and then be able to display that, so that a human can update, or some other application can debug. A human or some other application debug. So that's one. There has been some ask about at least can we figure out what's going on if we fail to deploy it, right? And I think Bala sort of Bala is asking for that, and then I think it's fair. The observability as a subgroup, as a task force, I guess we didn't launch for that purpose. We thought it would be more like a Nephew system problem, but then we probably would have frameworks that allow us to, for example, gather logs and statuses from Porch, using the same kind of mechanisms. So it's hopefully help, but I think you probably need a lot more than that for system debugging. Yeah, but anyway, so hopefully that answers your question. So we're looking more for the workload metrics.
Yeah, so that's what I heard. So
Mhm.
you started with network functions. Sorry,
Mhm.
you said network functions, but you also at some point in time mentioned Bala's requirement about observing the deployments itself, whether the deployments were successful in the edge clusters.
Mhm.
On the management clusters, I'm not sure if we have any specific requirement, but then service assurance is one of the requirement as they can see in the chat. Then it basically service the document that is mentioned in the chat, Varda, it's about service assurance itself, or is it about the observability? So the question is, is there any document where we have the scope mentioned right now, like the user story template document or any other document which says that from the observability perspective XYZ? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's something written, but then I mean I can share that. There's something written there's something written more of a presentation format, because I just want to get the subgroup kickoff. So I mean, compared to SDK, it's not as detailed in terms of documentations, but I'm hoping by gathering folks together, we can get a much better read of the scope of what it is. I'm trying to sketch the user story off of this, and the major user, as I said, was the SA at this point, but then it didn't start off as serving SA, but then it's getting evolved to a point where hopefully it can address the SA subteam's concerns.
So just one more minor comment and then I'll stop. Sorry about that. Just so even for the security working group, the SIG, right? Security SIG, there is a lot of dependency on this particular work item, because there is a lot of telemetry and alerts information that is going to get flown out of that, out of all the systems that we're going to build, right? Like if it is secrets management or whatever it is, right? Like if it's going to cause alerts and telemetry that will be flown into this modules here.
Okay.
Yeah.
The big thing is setting up the framework right, so it doesn't. It would be able to leverage by other
perfect
and subgroups. Yeah. Kieran, do you have something, because you had your hand up and then you put it down?
Yeah, I guess the conversation drifted off this particular issue that's up on the screen, so I didn't want to necessarily jump back to it, but I'll mention it now anyway. I guess here we are talking about correlating, because a workload isn't necessarily, or an NF deployment isn't necessarily just like a single microservice, or it could be groups of microservices, many pods, many different network connections and so on. So I presume we're taking into consideration being able to correlate the data from those individual lower level Kubernetes resources up to the individual Nephew components. Is that where the edge
that would be one of the
connecting Kubernetes data?
Yes, that we want to do. If we gather those data, we correlate those data with an NF deployment, basically, right? So this is the result of you pushing down an NF deployment for something other than 35GCs. That probably means a lot of different pods across different nodes, and then those data would have to be kind of aggregated and telling you that for your particular NF that is deployed, whether it succeed or not, they are for all the across all the different nodes and all the different pods and containers that it hits. These are the data that we actually gathered. Again, we don't do anything with the data. It's just data.
Yeah. No, but I was just wondering if it's worth calling that out in the user story, or maybe I should add a comment on that or something there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure, we can call it out. Okay. And there is actually free 5GC data that you can scrap, as I said earlier. The subscriber related things is something you can gather from API, from the API servers. There's service that's embedded inside a free 5GC deployment. So that actually overlooks the entire deployment, but mainly actually just talk to AMF. And then all the logs of all the different NFs that we can deploy. There were 10, 12 NFs that we deployed for a full free 5GC. That was actually quite useful for us, at least for Jim and I, when we're trying to make a call going. So this is also something good to gather. Marcin was asking when we will do something to structure log. We're not doing that. We just want to make the data available. Not so much doing anything to analyze it at this point. So these are the basic ones in terms of having something exposing data, because we're lacking that in the first place. The second one, which is a bit of a story. So this is an epic with stories. So this is basically a story, and then stories are in this talk. Deploy the data collectors is one of this particular stories. Any of the standard CNCF ones that we can deploy, I think that's probably the things that OTel probably has support already. And then we'll push it into mainly management clusters, but then if you want to float in bits, you can put it on a workload cluster too. Or if you do a collector, which is an actual OTel implementation of the collector, you can put that onto the workload clusters too. So again, whoever takes on this can make a decisions on seeing how we want to deploy the collectors, and we use it more for Star Hub, a hub spook architecture, where all the workload clusters just stream things over and have one central collector. Or we have some other workload cluster specific collectors that do something. We can sort of decide as we go. And then we'll have to find ways to expose that data to a workload cluster. So this is actually an interesting problem that we have not solved yet at this point, which is we have the Git repo to write to, so that the workload clusters would be getting config intent from management cluster, but then we never actually devise a feedback loop path. So we, as of writing, we still don't really have it. So that would be some way that we, as a community, and definitely one of the major contributions from the observability subgroup, is to basically create a more standard way for this feedback data to send back to management cluster. Yeah, go ahead, Rahul.
Hey, Stephen. So this is an interesting discussion, because this is one of the use cases that is getting discussed in the SIG security as to when it comes to sharing resources across management cluster, worker cluster, and between worker clusters as well, or the edge clusters as well. Hey, Vamshi, can you please mute? Vamshi, we're getting background noise from your side. Thank you. So what happens is, what is the way in which we can identify a workload wants access to a particular management cluster, right? Like, let's say, for example, a resource access or a permission access, right? Like, so that is fundamentally getting discussed as part of workload identity in SIG security. And I feel, so all the other aspects, like, there are secrets that are getting shared.
Yes.
And this also is relevant to the same discussion, is all I want to highlight, and say that, yes, there is some discussion.
There's I would rely on SIGSAC to tell us, whether or not that actually passes the emissions, the security compliance and our standards of security, so security standards for the project on this. So for us, we also know for sure that you're not creating channels between pods and all that stuff, between application pods. There has to be some funneling between two proxies.
Yes.
There has to be talk, and then they have to authenticate, have to handshake. Not only that, they would also have mission controls locally on the clusters to make sure that this workload we can gather something, or this workload can send something to the management cluster to this particular applications that it's gathering.
Correct.
We don't just open it up as an open channel to have everyone just keep on.
No. Yeah. That's so there are two proposals actually that are getting discussed in SIG security. The hope is that by the end of this month we will reach out to RX scope and this thing, and then discuss in that particular channel as to what would be the right model.
But then in terms of, this is more like a security way, or do you actually are already designing? Are you folks already making proposals on the how, meaning the plumbing, the networking aspects, or the?
So the first is the model. So that model is something that we are clarifying right now, and then the how part, there is some discussion about how part as well, but we're not picking up unless and until we get a handshake from other SIGs on whether the model itself is okay to follow, because it has impact across multiple.
So this is the part where the Google seed code is making trouble. So that's the reason why that seed code wasn't so widely accepted, I guess, by the community. Part of this is because, so how the Google seed code does it is that it monitors the clusters creations, and then immediately there is a module in management clusters, this Edge Watcher, that would send out the IP address of the gRPC server, basically, that sits on management clusters through the deployment repo. So so some confixing applies that, and there's a watcher on that resource, and then they'll know the IP address endpoint of how to send something back to the management cluster. So we open up like a gRPC channel to go through this. Well, we don't have a DNS server on Nephew, so it is an IP address. It's not a name. And then B, the tricky part of that is, no one. Well, so for the Google solutions, we create a VPN link, so it's basically just a pod IP off of that guy. It's a little easier to do so because the particular solutions creates a channel that the VPN routers would expose IP addresses from the clusters, and then it's like cluster IPs that sends to each other. There's a routable IP, but then in terms of plumbing, in this case, it's not something we in container lab we're having trouble trying to wire this. So that's one. The second one is obviously no one cares about security in this case when we open up that channel. So there's several concerns there. So now that's why this becomes a work items that we need more than anyone else first for observability, because sending something back is our basic needs for observability side, and we would definitely have to actually expose to a wider SIG2 community once we kind of make a design decisions on our side. But then obviously we have to consult the SIG SIG also to make sure that we are compliant with the security standards.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, so Pietra, go ahead.
So I would like to comment this and the previous task regarding the collectors.
Okay.
To be conformant with OpenTelemetry, you can have the OpenTelemetry supports the hierarchical orchestration of the collectors, right? You could have, if you need it, you could have sidecars in the network functions. You could have other collectors per node or per cluster, and they can communicate. And at the end, the last collector could push the data to the so-called backend. It could be remote backend or the local backend, even let's say Prometheus for metrics, Fluentbit for logs, or Jaeger for traces, right?
Yeah.
And I believe this mechanism is, and it's really important to make sure we'll be conformant with the security. I don't know how to do that shift, but maybe service mesh or something like that. I'm not sure if you would like to introduce some dependency to have a service mesh around clusters, but at the end, all you need to do, I know it's simplifying the problem, but all you need to do is to make sure that you're able to reach the fully qualified domain name. And in the OpenTelemetry, you have the exporters, you have backends. So the mechanism to share the data, it's there, but you make sure that you are doing this in a secure way. This is the only problem. One more thing regarding the collectors is that I don't have the hands-on expertise, but I saw that there is emerging standards called OPAMP for the collectors orchestration.
Okay.
And it will be also a good idea to deep dive and see, because it's I saw at least one tool called BindPlane from ObservIQ, which implements this protocol, and it could be helpful to I don't know, inject or let's say orchestrate the collectors.
Okay. Yeah, so I would imagine OTel standards and things would have simpler way, or at least more standard is a bad way, but at least like already tested way of deploying this. I think one of this is, how do we want to deploy the backends and how we want to deploy the collectors? That's one of the questions on this particular issues, is that whoever takes on this would make a proposal, design proposals on our Netfield management clusters and workload clusters relationships. How would you want to deploy the collectors? And then a good way to, well, bring it up, so it becomes, and how design to bring it up part. They'll bring it up as part of Netfield instantiations, and also obviously once you get to the second one, understanding how to get the data back, making sure that all the secure channels and things are set up, so that the deployments of backends and things could then gather data from all the workload clusters. So those are basically just part of this overall story that I sort of pictured. Obviously, there's a lot of details that hasn't been filled up.
Yeah, indeed, it's really big task. I'm not sure if it should be the responsibility of one person to decide on the architecture, how you will use the collectors. I mean, if you would like to, I'm not sure if this is a goal, but if you would like to, let's say, create some standards in Nephew, how to inject or orchestrate the collectors, and how to define the flow between them, what collectors, what exporters, and maybe what processor to use in the OpenTelemetry framework. It should be discussed more broadly. At the end, just like you said, the security is also the aspect of this task, but not everyone is expert in the OpenTelemetry and security at the same time. So it should be joint work of few people. Right. If you will have few people, of course.
Very few people. Yeah. Well, I mean, so this is needed for our subgroup. So our subgroup would have to make a proposal. But I do agree that the proposal needs to, obviously, it always has to go back to SIG2 general audience to say, this is our findings, this is our proposal, this is what we're going to implement. And also, it seems like we have to go through security SIG to make sure that this actually, again, adhere to the standards that we should have as a project. Yeah, good point.
So I may have a question. I don't know. It's just open question, or the question to. I'm sorry, I don't remember who was from the SIG security, but So the question is if this is really a part of the observability concern, or we assume that there is a safe mechanism to interact between clusters, and we would like to just put this requirement for the SIG security, and then we are here. I mean, if SIG security succeeds, we only care to deploy the observability, or we need to have a joint work. This is the question, not the statement.
Yeah, and that was the question I asked Rahul too, whether or not the how has been discussed, and then if it is, then perhaps we should leverage. Go ahead, Rahul.
Yeah, maybe I can share you some highlights about just in the last week. Right, there was a discussion that happened. Today, there's going to be a major update. Today morning PST time, or tomorrow morning PST time is there's going to be another discussion. Like I said, we are trying to understand. So before getting any of this work done, right, like we have to have a notion of workload identity in the first place, because without that identity you can't have authorization. So we are discussing what is that model going to look like, how will it scale across multiple clusters, what is it that we can do so that users don't have to actually, or the workloads don't have to themselves change. So there are a bunch of requirements that we have identified in the context. I'll share a slide deck there. Like I said, we are currently trying to identify the model that will work, and there is also discussion about some of the moving parts that might get used under the hood. Like Spiffy is something that is getting actively discussed for establishing the workload identity itself. Once we have that thing in place, then everything else sits on top of it. For example, it would be it secrets management, be it service mesh, be it the ability to for a workload cluster to export data to management cluster. All of this sits on top of it, right? Like so, right now we are in the discussion where we are proposing a model. Hopefully, by the next week, we'll be sending a proposal to RX scope team so that we can discuss whether at a high level this model makes sense, and if yes it makes sense, then we'll go for a reference implementation. That's the plan as of now. Having said that, I'll just share the slide deck that we presented in the last call so that you can identify about what the requirements are going to be.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
So if we have that, we can build on top of it. But then at this point, in terms of execution, we're looking at a POC phase for ourselves. So we can actually I don't know if we know what the requirements are yet, even for us on observability. So I would encourage that let's try to investigate and then build a more simplistic POC with. I don't want to say no concern about security, but at least assuming the security aspects of it is going to be taken care of by someone else, then we'll first build a POC to see what is needed and what kind of security measures and authentications things that we are needed, and they may be able to actually directly give more requirements and things to security sake also. Thank you, Rahul. Yep. So that's another big piece, as you said. All of this, I think the one part that at least very few of us agreed on is we'll be using the OpenTelemetry interface for to expose to instrumentations for doing any installations and things if it's already available, using the OTel collectors if appropriate, and then if there's some built-in Kubernetes things from OTel we can leverage things. So we would like to have at least several folks in the subgroup that would get to be very good at understanding the OTel, and then be able to see how we can conform to it, because we have no appetite to create our own standards in that field, and B, how is it useful in terms of all the other things, other tool chains that they already created. So this is one task that encompasses a bunch of other stories in place. But then, folks that are doing this could be focusing on just grabbing data first. And then in terms of exposing it, once we get a very good read on how to use the OTel pieces, then we can have a design and POCs on that piece also. And the next one is the operator. The NF operator should be able to somehow get the data from our framework to make a decision on whether or not it's satisfying the intent. So this is a channel that isn't. So one thing we obviously want to avoid is the operator going back to management clusters. If you only put Prometheus there, for example, and then fetch the data from Prometheus on management cluster. So we want to see if there's a mechanism through OTel or some other means that we can gather visibility data in the workload clusters directly from a NF operators. It could be other things that runs on workload clusters too. So basically, it's a workload cluster accessibility of the data, and then how to subscribe, how to get it, how to stream it. That's part of this story/task. Also, go ahead, Pietro.
So I think this is kind of probably challenging task. I mean, because you would like to, if I understood well, we would like to define some generic way to expose data for the network functions or the operators or some other entities, and it's not that.
So something like something like when we're streaming the metrics over to Prometheus running on, say, management cluster, and then it doesn't need to be the same stream, but then the NF operators for metrics that are essential to this network functions, they'll be able to specify also access control. So obviously, vendor A would not be able to read vendor B's metrics on the workload clusters. So and be able to gather those data through some means. So this particular story is about having something on workload clusters, and then primarily the NF operators to be able to access the data locally on the because the operator obviously is not NF, so the NF and the Kubernetes clusters are all having data, and then the operator should be able to access that.
Yes, it's probably easier when you assume that operator will access the data which will be defined to collect by the vendor. But what about metrics which are not vendor specific? Then you still need some way to expose it in a generic way. So you need some standard
that's right.
This API will be on the place. I don't know if this is the scope of this task force to define something like that. Do you see this? Or it's too far to think about that at this point?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to know. We're not so for sure we don't. So Nephew is not a standard body, so we're not creating a standard in the context of Nephew, the software project. For NF operators, for example, that are written for Nephew, they should have a uniform mechanisms to subscribe to some visibility data that are being exposed by the network functions or the infrastructure. So that's what we're asking for, basically, in this case. So the big thing is so the other NF operators written commercially would be able to access that data also.
Yeah, so Nephew generally relies on many standards, and even in the observability, probably you have the open telemetry, but it's the way to collect the data. There is no definition how to expose them. I mean, what API should be exposed in the context of 5G core, 5G run, or something like that. The question is if there are any standards. I know that there are the defined KPIs in the standardization, but it's not all, it will probably not the case that a vendor will have only such metrics. But I know it's not trivial to discuss at this moment.
Yeah. So in this case, I would imagine, right, the NF vendor, the operator who's written by NF vendor, would be subscribing to metrics that they know about. So we're not talking about standardizing metrics, meaning that if you're a 5G, if you're UPF, you must expose XYZ metrics. So we're not looking at that. We're looking for a mechanisms for the network function operators to say, oh, if I want to get metrics from my network functions, other than pretending like I'm Prometheus that reads on the service port, the service monitoring port, is there some ways for us to get this set of metrics from this group of network functions that I'm currently managing, and if we can specify that on more like an API type manners, and then as a framework we'll be able to expose that. At the very least, taking it from more the 3.5GZ perspective, because it's not available. so from there we have to implement something to do this. And whether or not that becomes a standard, or whether or not the community accepts it, in terms of the vendor communities, we welcome the vendor community to come in and say whether or not they want that same mechanisms to be able to actually do it for their commercial products too. So we'll see how that goes. But in terms of a implementation perspective, we do need something.
One last comment from my side, because I remembered a few months ago, Wim Hendricks, he had interesting idea about creating some normalization layer between to be able to use some metrics between vendors. I mean, to be vendor agnostic. I never had the discussion with him regarding that. How?
Yeah, that was an earlier vision, I would say, that there is a standard set of KPI that we can define where upon which all the vendors should support. I think that is such a large discussions for that goes way beyond I would even the scope of Nefio, really. So I would probably, well, so the idea would be once you get a KPI, which is KPI X equals to this set of metrics from vendor B, and this other set of metrics from vendor A and vendor B, and then vendor B providing some sort of functions and things that I would be able to take all those metrics and calculate the same standard KPIs. I think that's actually, it's a good idea. It's just that it's as the discussion goes, I just don't know whether or not this is within what we're supposed to do. I would love to see that, but then I don't think it's much of a conversation starter at this point. I mean, let's get the framework going and get an implementation and reference going. That's the same way that we did R1, I guess, in a way, for deployment. That we are building the CLDs as we go. We're building what is possible and the intermediate pipelines, the hydration pipeline, for example, as we go on, and then we'll take it from there. Yeah, because we're not, it's kind of hard for us to set standards. Although they're not standards, they're Nefio API still. But then at this point, whether or not this is really needed, it's more of a northbound problem. If an application comes in and said that I expect you to have KPI X, Y, and Z, and every vendor should support that KPI, that the application should convince them. I think more than anything. So if it comes to a day where framework needs to do something like, gathering different diverse set of metrics and normalize it using some sort of normalization functions that are provided by individual vendors, we can have the framework, but I don't think we're there yet. Murata, sorry, your hand's been raised for a long time.
So. Yeah, it's over time, no issue. For metrics, I think Nefio modeling, might be a good place to start. Where they try to standardize. And basically why I raised the hand is because, Steven, this is an excellent story, because you're telling observability is going to consolidate also in the management cluster or at some place, but it's very important if the consumer of observability is in the same workload, they have to have some mechanism to access it. So in that way, it is an excellent distributed story. That was my comment, Steve.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, let's get there. As Varada said, we're kind of on time. So the next couple ones are not anything. I think, if you folks have time, go ahead and click on it. So we shouldn't go too much overtime. And I guess the biggest thing I would like to ask is obviously, folks starting to pick what you're interested, and start investigating, because as you can see from my descriptions, everything is very open-ended at this point. So I would encourage interested contributors to take on tasks, or the whole story even, and then hopefully get a couple more people to help out per each story, and then kind of investigate and design what kind of approach and directions that we're going, and then we'll build a POC. We'll communicate that further with the community, obviously, and then also build a POC to prove that what we're doing, what we're thinking of doing, is actually working. So that's the big ask of this. So if you're interested, please do so. If there's any other things that you want to raise, you can raise it on Slack. And so far, I set this up for a weekly meeting, so we can talk again next week. But then in the meantime, if there's any questions on any items, or if you're interested to take on items, we can talk about that on Slack. Okay. Any other?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.